I'm so honored to present to you somebody that the Media Center already gave an award because we have this local heroes thing every year, and she was one of our local heroes this year. And Amber Stime is somebody who started a nonprofit called African Cradle that creates adoptions of children from Africa. And she herself is was an orphan from Ethiopia, but I want her to tell the story, and because she's incredible. So thank you, Amber. Come on up.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm glad the mic is not in front of us. I was born in Ethiopia, in the highlands, way in the northern part of Ethiopia, where the land is green, is fertile. So take away the picture that you have of the famine, brown country of Ethiopia. When I was about 2.5, 3 years old, a group of kids, my sister and a few others in our neighborhood, we were playing with this object that we found. We are children who don't have many toys, or didn't have any toys. Most of our toys consisted of sticks and twigs and pebbles. And if you know, we have the trees here, the eucalyptus trees, those little seeds that grow. We used to fill those with water and pretend those were our teacups. So, but this particular day we found this toy. Obviously must have been shiny, must have been very interesting. And so a group of us took this toy, and we were sitting on a porch of my uncle's house, and we were playing with it. And I'm the youngest of this group, and I'm not getting my turn. And I'm insisting that they give me my turn. If you know me, you would understand why that I'm insistent. So the older kids that I was with, including my sister, got a little fed up with this younger child and sat me down and said, "Here you go, you play with this." And this thing ended up being a bomb that exploded in my hands. Many years later, when I returned to Ethiopia, I saw the tin roof where the bomb had exploded, and also put a hole in the tin roof. Lucky for me, there was a hospital in my village. It was a hospital created by Seventh-day Adventist missionaries. And I was rushed there and given treatment. There was a doctor and his wife that were missionaries that worked there and were raising their children amongst the rest of us. The story I hear is that my father was very insistent they make sure that I was alive. He was so insistent, he had a rifle with him, telling the doctor, "You're going to make sure that she survives." I don't think that's the reason that I survived, but I did survive. After my accident, poor farmers, they didn't know what to do with the disabled child. Lucky for me, I have an uncle who's still around. At that time, he was a high priest to the Ethiopian king. And what I hear from most people when I say Ethiopia is, "Oh, let me see, Haile Selassie, 7th grade history class. I learned that name." So I'm assuming most of you know about Haile Selassie. My uncle was his priest. My uncle said, "Bring her to the city. Maybe if you bring her to the city, she will receive some help." And my father and I moved to the city, lived with my uncle for a while. And then my uncle said, "Maybe you need to put her in an orphanage. That way when foreigners come, they will see her and perhaps provide help for her." So eventually, my father put me in an orphanage. The first orphanage that I went to was in the city. It was a dumpy place, very scary. No matter what, I had already been used to living with the family and never being separate from my family, and that was a very shocking thing to go through. In my orphanage, there were many children, some of us with physical disabilities, some of us with mental disabilities. So it was an orphanage for both, physically and mentally disabled kids. I was one of the lucky ones because I had my legs, I could walk, And even though I didn't have fingers, I still had a great portion of my hands, so I could do most anything. So I was the most able-bodied child in my orphanage. Eventually, that orphanage that was in the city and in the dump had to be moved, and my parents, my American parents, came to Ethiopia really with that purpose of moving the orphanage from the city to a countryside, a hunting lodge that the king had given to the orphanage. So my parents, who were farmers in Minnesota, who had raised their children, my mother was born in Madagascar, so she had a bit of the African blood in her, came to Ethiopia, and within short time moved 35, 36 children from the city to the countryside. The interesting part about living in the country as children is you get to see a lot of wild animals. We saw porcupines that the guards would have had killed, and so the next day we could see, this live porcupine with all with the pines on it. And then often we would hear hyenas, and once in a while, if we were lucky enough to have a ride to the city and come back at night, we would see the shiny eyes of the hyenas. So if you've seen shiny eyes of the hyenas and you've heard them laugh, you're not about to walk to school, you run to school. And I ran to school often, especially if I had to go to school all by myself. About a year and a half or so, my parents worked in my orphanage, and then they decided it was time to go back home. And after being in Minnesota, I think they thought about it and decided they were going to adopt one of us children from my orphanage. I don't know how many they had on their list, but I was one of the ones that was on their list to be adopted. And Haile Selassie's daughter intervened and said, if you take Amber, at that time my name wasn't Amber, it was Alam Sahai. If you take her, we will help her travel costs and whatever else you need. So my parents adopted me. In 1970, at the age of 8.5, I ended up in rural Minnesota, September. Shortly after I was home, my home was in the country, beautiful house. My parents, my mom and dad, and my cat. Mind you, I had been living with 30-some children. We were used to being together. We told stories to each other night and day, to the point that we couldn't even remember whose story began and whose ended. Whenever we were lonely, we slept with one another. There were times when one of my best friends, who always slept on the bottom bunk of our beds, no matter what room we moved to, she was always on the bottom bunk. She had paralysis in her leg and couldn't get out of the bed easily and get into the bathroom. So I would be the one who'd get up in the night and help her on the toilet. So I left all of that and went into a nice, comfortable home in Minnesota, but it had nobody in it except my parents and my cat. But eventually I started school. It was a small school where elementary, middle school, and high school were all in one group. You didn't have them all separated. It was in a small town. And I arrived in first grade. And my first grade start, and I guess I would say most of my school year experiences have been very, very good. I don't know what the children in that classroom were told about me. I don't know what they were expecting. But obviously, whoever had explained to them who I was, that I was coming, I didn't know English, they were very welcoming. These children were so welcoming. To this day, many of them are still my best friends. I was given toys from them. I was invited to their house. I was welcomed by them day after day, helped with my English, to the point that I was able to do first and second grade in 1 year, so I could catch up to my age group and move on to third grade. So the story that I tell you is, as an immigrant, coming as a child, my story is about belonging. And I think if my friends in first grade weren't ready for me, or had said, no, you look different, no, you don't speak our language, no, we're not going to be your friends, maybe my sense of belonging in this country would have been different. But they didn't do that. To this day, when they have events, and if we're still connected, they invite me to their events. I remember they had a high school reunion. In 7th grade, I moved. We moved from that town to another town. And so I did all my middle school and high school years in a town about 9 miles away. But that first grade class of mine, when they graduated, they invited me to the graduation party. And I tell them, but I'm not in your class anymore. You know, I'm over here in this other town. But I was still on their list. When they had a reunion not long ago, they invited me. So that is my story, is that as an immigrant and as a child, there's nothing more important than to belong, and especially to be embraced by a welcome of other children, not always just the adults, but by other children. My life in Minnesota with my parents was wonderful. At the same time, I'm a child that looked different in the community, in my farming community. And then the stark contrast coming from Africa to Minnesota. I remember when it first snowed. I remember waking up and there's kind of a silence when it snows. There's a sense of silence, if you know it. And I remember feeling that, and then my father saying, come and see, and looking out the window, and our house was on a slight hill and with a long driveway, looking out the kitchen window and seeing this whole earth just covered with snow. And then the amazement of it, but the confidence that I had, I said to my dad, oh, is that for me? To this day, I like snow. I like it very, very much, very much. A land that is far, far away, that gave birth to me, and then another land that I came to was able to enrich my life. I don't often think of myself as being an immigrant because I don't have an accent. Rarely can people pick me out as being an immigrant just because they say, boy, you're so Americanized that we don't even know. But I do know that transition. I do know that feeling. I didn't walk it in the same kind of hardship, but learning a language, adjusting to food, looking different from majority. All of those things can have an impact. They can either be translated into our identity as a positive impact, or we can carry them as being negative. But the kinds of experience that we have when we immigrate makes that determination for us. Thank you for giving me this privilege to speak in front of you.